Fires rage either side of the Thames. The fuel, weeks of drought. The ignition, the hottest English day on record.
Tonight, wildfires are ripping through Europe and parts of northern Africa. In Spain, 17 fires are raging across the country, and thousands are frantically fleeing their homes.
Europe is in the grip of a fierce heat wave, with many countries across the continent experiencing record temperatures. Wildfires are burning in different parts of the continent, including in France, Spain, Italy, Portugal, Croatia and Greece.
Today in the town of Nantes, France, a reading of 107.6 Fahrenheit. Temperatures touched 100 in the UK.
We've set ourselves on a course of destruction. And the problem is, do we have the courage to actually get out of that course? Or are we stuck with it and we'll just simply drift with it until we wipe ourselves out?
Welcome to Facing Future. This summer, we're seeing extreme heat in the Northern Hemisphere. When this happened in France in 2003, at least 70,000 people died. Why are heat waves becoming more intense and prolonged? And what can people do about it? How will this affect food security? Peter Wadhams, polar scientist and Cambridge University professor emeritus, Bruce Phillips, climate change educator, and Raya Salter, my co-host, join me today to help answer these questions. Raya, what's happening?
Dale, as politicians and world leaders refuse to act, Europe is ablaze, is literally in a dystopian blaze. The UK is set to see the highest temperature it has ever had on record. And we are clearly in a true emergency. Peter and then Bruce, what on earth is happening? What is at stake? What are the consequences with this intense extreme heat?
Well, there's an intense, as you say, there's an intense stream of heat being funneling up from Morocco through Spain, through France and into Britain. I'm lucky because I live in Italy and it's missed us, but it's getting everybody else. Bruce explained the physics of the Gulf Stream effects which are doing this, but the magnitude is something which is truly enormous. I mean, the Guterres, the head of the UN, has said that this is an act of collective suicide. And he normally is very mild in what he says. But what it means is because we're doing absolutely nothing about global warming, that things like this happening, and they're going to happen more and more frequently if we don't do anything about reducing emissions or taking carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. So we're set ourselves on a course of destruction. And the problem is, do we have the courage to actually get out of that course, or are we stuck with it and we'll just simply drift with it until we wipe ourselves out? That's really important in terms of the forthcoming COP27 meeting. Very little was achieved at the COP26 meeting, but in COP27, the nations of the world are supposed to come up with tighter bids for how much they're going to be reducing emissions in the next few years. And yet there's no sign that they are doing so. And especially because the countries that should be doing this, the rich countries in the West, are not only doing nothing themselves, but they're also reneging on their commitments to provide $100 billion a year for the poor countries of the world, so to help them be able to handle the changes that are happening. As it is, we're going to find that countries that are not receiving anything very much from that wonderful plan are going to be very, very unhappy. So I think COP27 is going to be a time of very, very unhappy countries, one of which is Egypt itself, which is trying to improve its performance, but is not receiving anything very much from this fund. So any of us who are planning to go to Egypt for COP27 can expect that it will be more of a punch-up than a conference that will lead to some agreement.
It seems the people are not taking this very seriously. You see pictures of the heat wave in England, and it's people on the beach umbrellas, people cooling off. It looks like a party, a holiday. And they're not saying, desperate emergency, we got to do something. They're saying, oh, it's hot. It's kind of silly how people are dealing with this. Bruce, you've been traveling around in Europe. What's happening?
Yeah, if I start off with the UK at the moment, I've just got a message from one of my family that Cambridge has hit 40 degrees Celsius. So that, if that's confirmed, that's a new record. That's quite worrying. What often happens, unfortunately, and this is quite typical for certain news outlets in the UK, is they tend to put pictures of people on the beach and things whenever there's a heat wave. What they don't often report is the excess deaths that you get. At the moment, there's one particular newspaper that's trying to compare the current heat wave to 1976, which was a very strong heat wave in the UK. What they don't report is that 1976 heat wave was pretty bad, and we don't want lots of those. And the current one is about 4 degrees warmer than the 1976 one, so it's 4 degrees different. We also had a major one in 2003 that was across the whole of Europe, with up to, as you said, 70,000 dead. In the UK, multiple thousands dead from that as well. And that is a really big concern, because people do really suffer in these conditions. Even if they don't die from it, you can have serious problems with your heart, and medical conditions as well can be made worse by this kind of intense heat. And people don't, unfortunately, take it seriously. And then in Spain as well, I happened to be in Spain last summer, quite near where the record was broken in Spain. It seems to be following me around, I'm afraid, where they had over 47 degrees in Cordoba. So I was only a few kilometers away. I experienced about 44 degrees Celsius. I wasn't close enough to experience the 47, but 44 degrees. I was in a situation where I had no air conditioning, and I was worried. I was seriously worried. It's the kind of situation where you think, if I don't cool down, like this could get quite nasty.
They show these pictures of the beach, and what happens is that people die. The elderly die, the fragile die, the young die, and you can be perfectly healthy as well. Why is this happening? Why is this happening?
There's a combination of factors. What you'll often hear climate change deniers say is, oh yeah, you can't pin any one exact event on climate. But what you can say is that all of these events are made much, much more likely by our effects on the climate. We've got the ocean heat content accelerating upwards rapidly in the last couple of decades. That has an effect. If you've got warmer oceans, it's obviously going to have an effect on the land as well. People often forget that the land masses warm faster than the oceans as well. So we've got the oceans warming up rapidly, and we've got the land warming up even faster. So when you see the kind of 1.1, 1.2 degrees of warming since pre-industrial times, that's not often talking about the land. That's talking about the average between the land and the ocean, and the land's warming up even faster. For this particular heat wave, we've got the Gulf Stream that normally comes across from the US, across the Atlantic and towards the UK, that brings the slightly more milder weather normally. And what we've got happening is that the Gulf Stream has kind of split off. Part of it split off, and it's kind of formed a vortex just off the coast of France. And this is rotating in a certain way. It's drawing all this hot air up from Africa, and then it's holding it over Europe. So you're getting kind of Saharan weather, Saharan desert weather over Europe, and it's just holding it there. And that's why we've got the situation we have now.
Because in England, when something like this happens, the gutter press, which is most of the press, will always come up with a headline saying, "Phew, what a scorcher," and a picture of a girl in a bikini. Meanwhile, thousands of people are dying. So we can't expect any sort of serious treatment of this by the British press. And we can't expect a serious treatment of it either from many politicians. And in fact, perhaps we would appreciate a person called Sir John Hayes, you must have heard of him, who runs a group called the Common Sense Group. This Common Sense Group denies everything to do with climate change and thinks it's all a fraud, and so says that this is not real. What's happening is not anything we should worry about. So we can see how he got his knighthood, presumably saying things that would appeal to Boris Johnson. But you've got politicians who are not up to it, the job. That's nearly all of them. You've got a press which is not up to the job. That's nearly all of the press. So how are we going to actually take seriously what we have to do, which is really a total effort to first of all reduce our emissions of carbon dioxide, but secondly get rid of the carbon dioxide, have some very large engineering project to remove CO2 from the atmosphere. These things are needed, and if they don't happen, we've had it. Only we are becoming a collective suicide.
Well, we need to preserve our forests, and we need to, put the carbon in the soil, new farming methods. A lot of our food process is based on fossil fuels. Tractors, fertilizers, transportation, shipping across the world, and so forth. All of this is very fossil fuel intensive. And food shortages are seriously happening in the world. Bruce, I think you've looked into this a bit about what's happening globally in terms of food shortages.
Yeah, I mean, for a while, there was actually a CO2 fertilization effect where basically the CO2 was increasing plant growth. But that seems to have basically slowed down rapidly in the last 10 years or so. So we were seeing an effect from it, a mild positive effect. The problem is that as the temperature goes up, you get the soils drying out. And obviously plants need CO2, but they also need water. And without that water, and with that drying soil effect, we're now starting to see very much a slowdown in agricultural growth. So agriculture was keeping up with our demands. It's struggling to do that now. Plus, you now have plants that can no longer process the CO2 as efficiently as they were because of the higher temperatures and the lack of water. So it's quite a complicated thing. You've probably seen that kind of meme online of people going, oh, CO2 is plant food. That's a very basic, naive way of looking at it, because plants don't just need CO2. It's like saying humans only need oxygen. So we don't need food as well. So it's kind of, it's a very simplified way of looking at it, saying, oh, plants need CO2, so it's fine. You could argue, humans need sugars. You wouldn't overload a human with sugars because that would cause more harm than good. And it's the side effects from that. For example, in humans with the excess sugar, you might cause diabetes. It's the same thing with plants. You can have too much of something, and the side effects from that are now starting to affect our food security.
It's terrible because it's instability is making it worse. So we're having food systems threatened by this heat, and we're seeing food from the Ukraine, hasn't been able to get out, and now France and other countries that are grain producing, because of this heat wave, are also going to see their food production go down. And so I can only imagine this is completely catastrophic for global food supply.
Definitely. I mean, it's really, you've already seen an increase in the amount of global hunger has actually increased. It was actually decreasing for several decades. And then around about 2016, 2017, global hunger started to increase again. And then obviously you had the pandemic, which exacerbated the problems. Then we had other political problems as well. But it's interesting that people like the USDA, so the US Department of Agriculture, I think it is saying that climate is one of the big impacts here. It's political turmoil combined with climate. But what we often forget is that often it's climatic factors, maybe a failed harvest or something else, which also impacts politics now. So you're seeing, governments fall because people haven't necessarily, got what they need anymore. So it actually works both ways. It's kind of a vicious cycle in a way.
In the West and in Canada, ranchers are selling off their cattle because they can't water them. And, at some point we're going to be saying, no, we're not going to feed grain to animals because we need the grain to feed people. I think most of us here have stopped eating meat and fish because of the climate impacts of it, if not from the compassionate aspect of it. So, this is something everyone can do. Stop eating meat immediately. And the fish also from the ocean is a serious problem because we're scraping the ocean floor in order to, industrially bring in all the fish that we can get our hold of. And we need those fish to keep the ocean safe. And we need the large fish, which are getting in the nets, to keep the ocean circulating. And if it doesn't circulate, it heats up even faster because the cold water from beneath isn't coming up.
Well, in the long run, as well as this Gulf Stream effect, we have the jet stream effect, which was the fact that the jet stream is slowing down because of the contrast between Arctic air and tropical air being much less than it used to be. by slowing down and breaking up into little fragments. The fragments themselves are causing weather events, which are the ones which we notice from extremely hot or extremely cold events. And this is associated with the jet stream no longer being a coherent current. The effects are mind-boggling because the latitudes where they happen are exactly the latitudes where we grow all our crops. In the Midwest, the prairies, Europe, the Ukraine, insofar as there's any of it left. All of these are places where we grew our crops and we relied on them, but where that growth is being upset by these weather events. So everything that's happening seems to be extremely disastrous, and it's not clear where there's a way out that we can that can save us from really bad effects on the food front as well as other things.
It seems like there is an incredible acceleration and that we're continuing to see these effects happening faster and more quickly and sooner than we had originally anticipated. I know that's true in many regards and also for the Arctic, correct?
Well, yes, with the Arctic, very recently, one of the things that baffled everybody, including me, was that you had a heat wave, an enormously large heat wave in the Arctic and in the Antarctic at the same time. Now, this has never happened before. If you have an unusual climatic effect in polar regions, it's either in the Arctic or it's in the Antarctic. But now you've got both of them together, and you have to, first of all, try to understand the mechanism for that. And then what does it mean and what will it lead to? And these are still things that people are arguing about. But it's not happened before that there's been a 20 or 30 degree anomaly of temperature in the Arctic and in the Antarctic, both at the same time.
Yeah, that's kind of amazing because it's summer one place and it's winter the other place. But you know, so sea level rise, there are various predictions flying around. It depends largely on what happens with the melting ice. What do you think, Peter? Where are we going to go with the sea level rising in this next few decades?
Again, it's the sea level rise is now accelerated to 1 centimetre every 2 years. And it used to be about 1 centimetre every 4 to 5 years. So the graph of sea level, it's like the graph of CO2 in the atmosphere. It's accelerating upwards in a nice but not nice exponential way, so that we're getting an increased rate of sea level rise every year, which is having a serious effect on the world because of the fact that it's going to result in large-scale losses of cities, towns, farming land, fisheries. This is really terrible. Yet because it's a slowly advancing exponential, nobody does anything about it. And it's very typical that nobody's doing anything about things when they're going to lead us to complete catastrophe.
Because it's fascinating because, we have professors as esteemed experts as esteemed as yourself and folks that we're speaking to, yet it also seems very simple. We're literally burning up at both ends. And as you're saying, nobody is acting. And I think one reason that folks aren't acting, I wanted to get your thoughts, Bruce, is just misinformation in the media. Our best scientists, our most experienced scientists are telling us we're literally burning up at both ends of the globe. And yet all we see are beach pictures and, bikinis and greenwashing.
Yeah, I mean, one of the interesting things was at COP26, the largest delegation, and I'm pretty sure this was the delegation that had all the private jets, was a fossil fuel delegation. It wasn't a country, it was the fossil fuel delegates. So that's right. one aspect. So there's direct lobbying from the fossil fuel companies, and then there's the underhand bit. In a lot of areas, it seems to kind of, how to describe it, there's a certain element of society, the kind of conspiracy theorists type people, I guess, in general, that for a while they were kind of going after kind of COVID attacking vaccines and going after scientists. And now I think, unfortunately, a lot of the fossil fuel lobby groups have managed to turn those same people against climate action. So I've seen a lot of that in the UK. It's the same people pumping out the same misinformation. And it's actually linked to only a few accounts. I mean, I can probably say it's around 20 accounts on, for example, Twitter, which I'm quite experienced in, which are pushing most of the climate misinformation and disinformation. And it's these accounts that are really driving it. You also notice how many of the accounts that are following them are very, very new accounts. And either some of them are genuine, but some of them definitely aren't genuine accounts. They're really not. I mean, there was a Brown University study on this. I think it was about 25% of tweets on climate are not by real people. So these are bots. And the vast majority of those are climate misinformation ones and people trying to slow down action on climate. So there's that aspect. And we've investigated a couple of quite large groups. I won't give their name because I don't want to give myself away, but we kind of gone deep into some of these groups to find out what their activities are. And we managed to catch one very large group with members in 120 different countries that are spreading misinformation. And this was just an outright climate denial group, just saying, oh, climate change is not caused by CO2 or human emissions. That was an outright one. But nowadays, the climate change denial has shifted. So the kind of people I'm talking about here are people like Bjorn Lomborg, Michael Schellenberger, who recently lost his election bid in California to be governor, which I was quite pleased about, and a guy called Alex Epstein, who's a fossil fuel PR guy. And these kind of three accounts, they've moved from outright saying, okay, it's got nothing to do with, CO2 to accepting there is climate change, but now claiming it's either beneficial or claiming that the benefits of fossil fuels outweigh the benefits of going to net zero. So what I often counter them with this is I go to the extremists at Deloitte, one of the largest business analysts in the world, and they've just put out a report this year that said the costs of climate change and inaction on climate change will cost $178 trillion by 2070. On the other hand, moving to net zero as quickly as possible will gain the world economy $43 trillion. So it's either, do you want to be $43 trillion better off, or do you want to be $178 trillion worse off? And I know for me personally, it's not about the money, but for a lot of people, and particularly governments, I think, and businesses, they're now starting to go, okay, this really is an issue. I do see some hope. I also see groups, and I think a lot of it's coming from individuals, like yourselves, people acting on it. And I do see a slight change in the kind of the fact that the climate change deniers have to move to accepting that it's a real thing now and having to try different tactics shows really they're on the losing foot. And we're starting to make progress and kind of pushing that element back. And once you have the majority of people on side, then you get politics on side as well. But I think one of the most powerful things people can do is just vote out the people that are stopping this action. There's a website in the US called opensecrets.org. You can search for your particular politicians in your area, and you can find out who funds them, who's funding their campaigns. And it's interesting. I've yet to find a US politician who is pro fossil fuels and we need to pump more fossil fuels out of the ground, who isn't also funded by fossil fuels in some way for their campaign. If anyone can find one, let me know, because that person maybe is just stupid. but it's just crazy,
Just to follow up, just 2 days ago, the coal senator from West Virginia, it just stopped what would have been an imperfect, U.S. approach to addressing the climate crisis. And I'm hearing that it's so, just in terms of the bots and 25 accounts, it's so few people really who are holding us back from survival and a better future.
Exactly. I mean, I'll say his name, Manchin. So I mean, it's interesting. I saw Stephen King, the author. I don't know if I'm allowed to swear. Am I allowed to? You can always bleep it out. You said Manchin, right? so it's good to see some big famous names recognizing that this guy is holding a lot of stuff back. It's not just him. But he does seem to be the linchpin that's holding back the flood of climate action. So that is a big problem. But it's amazing also how these few kind of 25 names managed to get onto TV shows, managed to get their information across. Quite a big one that I see popping up, and it's usually memes as well. There's a lot of memes on Twitter, Facebook, which is completely misleading. And I spend a lot of time trying to get this is misleading and here's why with scientific information of why it's wrong doesn't always work. But sometimes it does. You get a few people, and that's quite satisfying. You find that someone's like, oh, I didn't know that actually. Thanks for letting me know.
Well, the huge problem of fossil fuels, we're subsidizing fossil fuels all over the world. That's the insanity. That's the thing that has to stop. In terms of what people can do about heat waves, I mean, we do know that wet bulb temperatures mean if the humidity is high and the temperature is high, the death can occur in 6 hours. You have to get out of the heat. You have to get yourself into a cooling center somewhere. You know, if you're feeling dizzy or tired or whatever, this is a serious symptom at this point, and you have to get out of the humidity and out of the heat. And many people in many parts of Europe and the UK do not have air conditioning. Not to say that the air conditioning may not indeed break down during a heat wave, because it gets so hot that the pressure from all that air conditioning and the heat can, crash the system. So, it's not a matter of bikinis and bathing suits. It's really a serious matter, and we all need to really take it seriously. One of the things we can do is, of course, to put pressure constantly on our politicians and not let them off the hook.
Well, one of the things for that is sea level rise. And in relation to people denying it, I've been working on brush fires in Sardinia as been one of the things I've been working on recently. But in doing that, also at the same time, they were having a summer school on sea level rise. And so I gave a talk on that. And then there was an American scientist came on and said, well, you've been saying sea level rise is clearly due to melting of the Greenland ice sheet, which is pretty clear to me anyway. But he said it's not. It's due to warming of the ocean, and therefore the water is expanding, and that explains sea level rise, not the fact that the ocean is receiving large dollops of water from melting ice sheets. And I said, well, isn't this clearly a loss of water from ice sheets that will result in ice sheets disappearing? And he said, oh, no, it's this. We calculate that it's due purely to expansion of the ocean. And well, I guess I've looked up stuff about that, and I don't see anybody who would agree with him. But he's very he's very firm about this, and I don't see why he alone seems to hold that view, or what political purpose there is in saying that the oceans are not rising because they're receiving new water, but because they're simply getting warmer.
Well, the ocean expansion from the heat is a factor, but it's not.
It's now a minor factor compared to the loss of ice from Greenland and Antarctic ice sheets.
So you're thinking that this blue ocean event, where the Arctic does not completely melts in the summer, may occur within this decade?
Well, I think it might occur this year. There's been so much warming going on with these extremely high temperatures, and the high temperatures extend to ocean regions, like the region around the Barents Sea has been warming at 7 times the rate that it normally did. So you're getting now hyperheated Arctic oceans, which will, I'm sure, this year or maybe next year, melt away completely, and then we'll have a blue ocean event, and that means we'll probably never get back to a summer sea ice event once that's happened once.
So we are in serious trouble. We're not taking it seriously enough. We hope that our programming and other programming will help people understand the extent to which this crisis is going to affect us all, and much sooner than expected. Thank you all very much for being with Facing Future today, and sharing your wisdom.
Thank you. Thank you so much.